Dobar dan i dobroveče. Dobrodošli u Kulturni centar Beograda. Imamo izuzetno zadovoljstvo i čast da, kao i mnogo puta do sada, u saradnji sa Fondacijom Heinrich Bell i Institutom za filozofiju i društvenu teoriju predstavimo i čujemo istaknute predavače i profesore univerziteta širom sveta. Danas u gostima Beograda, vas i nas, dakle u Kulturnom centru Beograda, imamo zadovoljstvo da predstavimo gospođu Michaele Schreyer, koja dolazi sa Slobodnog univerziteta iz Berlina i koja je u jednom periodu, značajnom periodu, bila članica Evropske komisije. Dakle, predavanje nosi naziv Stanje Evropske unije uoči i nakon nacionalnih izbora tokom 2017. godine. Predavačicu će predstaviti Jelena Vasiljević, naučna saradnica Instituta za filozofiju i društvenu teoriju, a ja bih pozvala gospodina Nenada Šebeka, direktora Beogradske kancelarije Fondacije Heinrich Bell, da vam se obrati. Izvolite.
Hvala vam najlepše. Ispred Fondacije Heinrich Bell dobroveče i dobrodošli, četa mala, ali odabrana. Ovo su razgovori o Evropi koji su pokrenuli, i veoma mi je drago da ih ovde vidim, moja koleginica Paola Petrić ovde i prethodnik na mom radnom mestu Andreas Polterman. Razgovori o Evropi su imali za cilj da na neki način nama koji smo još uvek u predvorju, u predsoblju, da približe tu Evropu, da razgovaramo o njoj sa stručnim ljudima, da razgovaramo o ozbiljnim problemima. Ja za vas kao publiku imam jednu molbu. Nakon predavanja koje ćemo čuti od gospođe Schreyer, bit će pitanja i odgovori. Moja molba ka vama jeste da iskoristite to, da ne razmišljamo o sami sebi samo kao o problemu, nego da vidimo šta je to što mi odavde sa brdovitog Balkana, sa svim našim problemima, kao deca sa posebnim potrebama, tako se najčešće ta Evropa odnosi ka nama. Hajde da vidimo, pa makar kroz razgovor, kroz pitanja, da vidimo šta je to, na koji način mi možemo da budemo deo rešenja, a ne samo deo problema. Hvala najlepše, Jelena, izvolite.
Hvala vam. Ja ću biti vrlo kratka. Moje ime je Jelena Vasiljević, ja sam saradnica na Institutu za filozofiju i društvenu teoriju i mi već jedan duži niz godina sarađujemo sa Fondacijom Heinrich Bell, a pre svega i taj segment saradnje nama je izuzetno važan kroz ovu mogućnost da dovedemo istaknute intelektualce i stručnjake koji nam onda pomažu da zajedno mislimo o nekim problemima Evrope, a i našeg društva. I mi to radimo uglavnom kroz organizaciju naučnih seminara i ovakvih javnih predavanja, u čemu nam je važan partner upravo Kulturni centar Beograda i mnogo im hvala na tome. Želim još samo da kažem da će predavanje biti naravno na engleskom. Pitanja možete da postavite...
Ugasili smo. Možete sve da ostavite.
Uspela sam da uništim. Želim samo da vam kažem da ukoliko osjećate možda neku nesigurnost, možete slobodno da postavite pitanje i na srpskom, pa ću ga ja prevesti profesorki Schreyer, dakle ta mogućnost postoji. U svakom slučaju vas ohrabrujemo da postavljate pitanje. Profesorka Michaele Schreyer je ne samo da pripada svetu akademskom i istraživačkom, ona je profesorka ekonomije i predaje na Slobodnom univerzitetu u Berlinu, ona je takođe i političarka i stručnjakinja za pitanje budžeta i ekonomsku politiku, bila je članica Evropske komisije u periodu od 1999. do 2004. godine i danas ćemo pre svega čuti razmišljanja o nekim problemima Evropske unije u ovoj dosta turbulentnoj godini kada su neki važni nacionalni izbori, neki koji su se desili, neki koji nam tek predstoje, dosta utiču na probleme i krizu koji već neko vreme traju u Evropskoj uniji. So, without further ado, Professor Schreyer, please welcome, and the floor is yours. So after your lecture, I will be moderating, and I just gave these options so people could ask questions in Serbian, and I would translate them. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to the Heinrich Bell Foundation for this nice introduction. Although I couldn't understand it, but I think it was a nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about the state of the Union after and before national elections in the European member states in this year. As you know, the EU was founded 60 years ago, and I must say I'm personally very grateful to the founding fathers that they have taken such a wise decision. What has been achieved in these 60 years of European integration is really an incredible success. Former enemies became friends, shaping their future together. The community of first 6 states are now a community, a union of 28 states, and most of the European citizens in the EU live in peace for as long as the history of Europe has not known it for centuries. The EU is not only, as you know, a single market. The EU is the promise to its citizens on a life in democracy instead of dictatorship, with the rule of law instead of arbitrariness, with equal rights for the people instead of discrimination. It's a promise on joint efforts to increase people's prosperity and social protection, and it is a promise on long-term security for a life in freedom and peace. This 60 years of European integration was not a straight way. Sometimes integration came to a halt, to a standstill, and then it was accelerated by crisis often, political crisis, economic crisis, and elections on the European level, on the national level, they have always been important for the integration process, for the speed of integration, for the direction of integration, for the priorities. But for decades, I have to say, political parties which put in principle the EU into question had not played a major role. And this has changed in recent years. Let me, before I elaborate on the issue, let me first make some personal remarks. I'm personally really an EU fan, I have to say. I lived in West Berlin when the wall was still standing in the town. And in that happy moment of history when the wall came down, I was a member of the regional government of Berlin, and thus I could contribute with my work to the reunification of Berlin. And later, as a member of the European Commission, I had the great opportunity to contribute with my work to the accession process of 2004, overcoming the division of Europe. This is the political background for my pro-European spirit. But I want to clarify that here I'm not speaking on behalf of the Commission or on behalf of any other organization, but as a political scientist. What is the state of the Union today? We see several internal challenges which emerged over recent years that threaten the ability to act of the EU, while at the same time the EU is facing severe global challenges which require responses quite urgently. I want to highlight 3 internal challenges. It's Brexit, the rise of the anti-European parties, and the conflict with 2 member states about values and institutions of liberal democracy. On the Brexit referendum, as you have in mind, took place more or less exactly 1 year ago on the 23rd of June, and a majority voted in favor of leaving the EU. In March this year, the UK government initiated the official withdrawal process, and this Monday, this week, the Brexit negotiations started. It's now the first time that a member state will leave the European Union. And while there is a lot of experience in the EU with accession negotiations and accession treaties, no such experience exists with the opposite exit talks and exit treaties. Nevertheless, the EU 27 have very quickly agreed that the Union will maintain its unity and act as one, with only one negotiator on behalf of the Union, and there will be now no bilateral negotiations. So also the risk that Brexit could destabilize the EU is now limited by this firm commitment of the EU 20 to stick together. I call Brexit a tragedy. Why? The decision in the UK was based on questionable and even fake arguments in the Leave campaign. For example, the Leave campaigners used simple wrong fingers on the question how much the EU has to pay into the European budget, and as former commissioner responsible for the budget, I can really say it in this way. The Leave campaigners argued that the EU politics are decided by unelected bureaucrats and have no democratic legitimacy. But if we compare the democratic legitimacy of the EU's institutions and the decision procedures with those in the UK, then one comes to the result that the EU really does not need to hide behind the UK. It's just on the contrary. Just remember that the British Parliament had to take legal actions against its own government to get the right to vote on the final Brexit treaty, whereas the European Parliament, its right to decide on an exit treaty is even enshrined in the primary legislation, and there will be no Brexit treaty if the European Parliament does not agree. This is only one example. And the Brexiters, those who were in favor of Brexit, had the slogan, "Take back control." This was one of the highlighted slogans. But will the influence of the UK grow in a globalized world by leaving the EU, by acting alone? Will the country really gain sovereignty? I have strong doubts on this. So Brexit, it's a pity, it will be a lose-lose situation, even when the negotiations are conducted in a very good spirit. And the highest risks are on the British side for the peace process in Northern Ireland, for a breakup of the UK, and in particular for its economy. But the EU will do its best to limit these risks for the UK. I want to come now to this question of the anti-European parties. You know that the loudest advocate for Brexit was the UKIP party, the United Independence Party. It was a single-issue party. It has just the Brexit as political program. And in the last elections for the European Parliament in 2040, this party became the strongest British party in the EP. And now I think it's worth to say that in the new elected British Parliament, they have not even one seat. So what about Eurosceptical or anti-EU parties in the European Parliament? The right-wing parties have about 20% of the seats. There are deputies from the French Front National, the Belgian Flams Bloc, the Hungarian Jobbik, from the German party AfD, to mention only a few one. But their impact, the impact of these anti-European or Eurosceptical parties on the decisions of the European Parliament is quite low, but they have influence on the public discourses, and by that they have also influence on the positions of other parties when these parties try to win back voters by adopting the arguments of the populist parties. What do these populist anti-European parties have in common? It's ideologies against the cornerstones of liberal democracies. They are against the concepts of political pluralism, of pluralistic societies guided by the principles of equal rights, protection of minorities, the rule of law. these populist parties, they all see immigration and globalization as the roots of all problems in the society, and they like to present themselves, even if they are only a small part of the society, they like to present themselves as the representatives of the common man, they call it so, and agitate against what they call the political establishment. And they are in favor of authoritarian regimes and often use hate-filled speeches not only against Brussels, but against other nations and against minorities in the society. In recent years, I have to say, the anti-European populist parties have gained more and more votes in national elections, and thus the probability increased that they could directly influence European policy through governmental participation on national level, or could even enter the European Council, you know, the table of the heads and state of government. And because of these risks, the public interest in the elections in other member states has increased enormously in the European Union. People know the outcome of a national election is no longer only an issue for the national population of this country, but for the European population as a whole. And therefore, presidential election end of last year in Austria, the parliamentary elections in the Netherlands this year, and in particular the presidential election in France were followed with much European attention. What do the results of the last national elections tell us? We see a change. We see that the Brexit vote and the election of Donald Trump as American president comes across like a wake-up call to the Europeans. We see a new political awareness about what is at stake if an anti-liberal and an anti-European politician would become head of state or government. In the presidential election in Austria in December, the pro-European candidate, van der Bellen, pulled out the candidate of the right-wing party, a candidate with a very clear majority. In the parliamentary elections in the Netherlands in March this year, the right-wing populist party of Geert Wilders achieved much fewer votes than forecasted some weeks before. And the presidential election in France was followed with special international attention. Marine Le Pen of the Front National as a French president, as a member of the European Council, as a president of a country that is a military nuclear power, and as a permanent member in the Security Council of the UN, the consequences of such a scenario would have been heavy not only for France, but for the EU and for the whole international community of the Western world. Luckily, I need not to speculate in detail on the possible positions of a Front National politician in the Security Council of the US. Luckily, the French voters have decided otherwise, and with an overwhelming majority of 66% of votes for Emmanuel Macron, the candidate with the explicitly pro-European program. And on this Sunday, as you know, his new movement even won the majority of seats in the parliamentary election. This landslide victory of Emmanuel Macron is a very important signal for the upcoming national elections. It's a signal with pro-European attitudes and pro-European program elections can be won. In Germany, parliamentary election will take place this December. The composition of the Bundestag is governed, just for information, the composition is governed by proportional representation. And according to the latest polls, 6 parties will enter the Bundestag, the parliament. What are their positions towards the EU? In the leftist party, sovereign and Eurosceptic positions prevail, but they are not advocating for leaving the EU. On the other side, on the right side, right-wing populist party AfD clearly stands for nationalistic policy and for a departure from values of liberal democracy. This party was founded during the Euro crisis, and it would be now the first time that this party is represented in the Bundestag, but consent to this party is sinking. Polls say AfD would catch about 8% of the votes. This is far less than forecasted 1 year ago. The other four parties are pro-European, the Greens most strongly. With the AfD, no other party is willing to form a coalition. Thus taking all differences between the pro-European German parties into account, the differences regarding concrete proposals, what the EU should do and in which direction it should go, one can say that the German election and the formation of the next government is clearly not a decision on stabilizing or destabilizing the European Union. Rather, the pro-European parties in Germany are all aware of Germans' responsibility for the future of the European project. And they all are in favor of strengthening the Franco-German partnership as a very important pillar of European integration. Parliamentary elections, to mention it shortly, maybe in Italy too, and this is still open whether it happens, but I want to say that in the last local elections in Italy, the populist five-star movements has suffered a strong defeat, and in Austria too, the right-wing Eurosceptic party FPÖ loses approval in the polls. In Austria, there will be election in October. In October, there will also be an election in the Czech Republic, and here it is difficult to predict whether the current conflict between the EU and the Czech Republic on immigration issues will have an impact. So it's very good news for the ability of the EU to act, that the rise of anti-liberal parties rejecting the European Union has not only come to a standstill in several member states, but that the pro-European parties have a new influx. And it's particularly encouraging that new pro-European citizens movements are emerging, for example, Pulse of Europe. Here, in many cities in the European member states, people meet on Sundays for demonstration pro-Europe. And they listen to speeches of ordinary people, which are then telling their experience with Europe. And these movements clearly indicate that more and more people realize what is at stake, and they demonstrate for a stable European Union that safeguards their values and their way of living. So, good news, but it's not the time to lean back. The roots why people vote or voted for the populist parties have, of course, to be tackled. These roots are the fears becoming looser of globalization, the concerns about migration, the concerns about global terrorism, and I will later come to these challenges. But before, I want to make some remarks on the internal conflict between EU institutions and the governments of Poland and Hungary. Regarding Poland, the conflict goes mainly about independence of the judiciary, which is undermined by various measures of the current government. And the conflict with Hungary, it's about freedom of the press, it's about the academic freedom, and now also about the work of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Prime Minister Orban is openly announcing that he will turn his country into an illiberal democracy. And both countries, Poland and Hungary, reject the critics of the EU institutions as interference in their national sovereignty. But the EU, I want to stress, is not only a single market, it's also a union of values. The European Treaty makes it very clear. And for the accession to the EU, you know it very well. The candidate countries must therefore establish laws, establish institutions which guarantee the rule of law, the human rights, a pluralistic and lively democracy, and NGOs are part of a lively democracy. That's the reason why the European Union supports the work of NGO with pre-accession aid during the negotiation and accession process. Authoritarian regimes are opposed to NGOs, which they cannot control. Authoritarian regimes want everything in their hands and under the control of the state. Controlled, guided democracies are their aim. And unfortunately, with the new law, according to which NGOs in Hungary working with financial support from abroad are branded, Prime Minister Orban places his country in a row with Russia, Turkey, China. And this is, of course, not acceptable for the European Union. The European Union needs checks and balances to ensure compliance with its values, also when a country is a member state. And for this purpose, the EU has at its hand infringement procedures. Now there is a new rule of law procedure, and finally, there is the Article 7 of the EU Treaty, which, if necessary, provides for a suspension of voting rights. But apart from the fact that using this Article 7, its application then at the end requires unanimity in the Council, I support that the European Commission tries again to solve the conflict with these two countries in dialogue and with the mentioned procedures. But I miss stronger peer pressure from other member states, and also the European political parties here have a responsibility that they must take over. It's because the values of liberal democracies are really fundamental for the European Union, and they must be protected against attacks. So this conflict is not over, but I don't give up hope. What about the economic crisis in the European Union, about the euro crisis? Is it over? The answer is yes and no. Yes, the EU is no longer in a crisis mode, but, and that's a no, in some member states the economic situation is still very tense, and on the European table there are further tasks to be settled. First, a general remark. On the economic side of integration, the record of 60 years economic integration is very positive. The EU is the biggest single market in the world. It counts for 22% of world GDP. The EU's share in world export is more than 15%. The euro is the world's second most used currency, and the level of social protection in Europe is the highest in the world, and net inequality after transfers and taxes is much lower, on a much lower level in the EU than in other regions of the world, so redistribution functions. But Europe's economy was hit hard by the global economic crisis. Now we see continuing recovery from the crisis. The economy overall is doing quite well. Growth rates are rising, unemployment is falling, public sector deficits are shrinking. However, some countries are still struggling with worrying economic problems. You know it from your neighbor country, Greece. And this situation is not only a problem of the state concerned, but it is a problem for the European Union as a whole, because the European Union is also a union of solidarity. It has the goal of convergence in the economic situation between the member states, and we saw such process of convergence during the long time, up to 2008. The EU was even called a convergence machinery. This means that people in poorer regions of the European Union could increase their income relative to the richer regions. But the convergence process has stopped with the global and European financial and economic crisis. We see now in the European Union two trends. On the one side, Central European member states continue to close their economic gap, their income gap with the richest country of the EU, while some southern member states like Italy and Greece are falling behind. And this, of course, has to be tackled in common efforts. What was the response of the EU on the crisis? The EU has significantly expanded its rules on control of the financial market. This was very important, of the banking sector. It made major steps towards establishment of a banking union, and the EU has considerably strengthened the rules for coordination of national economic and financial policies. We call it strengthened the economic governance. All these rules for strengthening the coordination places new demands on the member states and also, and this I want to stress, also on the accession countries. New demands according decision-making procedures and institutions, and it places new demands on parliaments also, on administration and science and civil society. Serbia participates already in the multilateral economic dialogue with the European Commission and the EU in this area to prepare for participation in the multilateral economic policy coordination. Such new EU rules serve, of course, on the one hand, as means for Europeanization of national economic governance, but on the other hand, and this is very important, these are also steps to increase transparency and efficiency of national decision-making processes and of national administration. And together, the provisions on external and so we have these new rules for transparency, and together with the provisions on external and internal control in the use of EU funds, this and with the rules on procurement, the new rules of economic governance are also very important building blocks to increase transparency and combat corruption in the public sector. Corruption, this is really a very important issue because corruption undermines economic development. It is a serious cause for economic inequality in a society, and it undermines democracy. And for the fight against fraud concerning the funds from the EU budget, the establishment of a European prosecutor will be a crucial step. As a budget commissioner responsible for anti-fraud, also I have launched this debate on establishing a European prosecutor already 15 years ago. Now the birth of the baby is approaching after 15 years. 16 member states have decided to establish a European prosecutor's office in so-called enhanced cooperation. So 16 member states will already go ahead, and I hope I can once see the baby working. Now, during the crisis, also new rescue funds were introduced for the euro area member states, which can no longer borrow on the financial market at affordable conditions. And these loans given to these member states, for example, Greece, there are similarities to the policies of the IMF. The loans from the euro area rescue funds are conditional to the implementation of strong economic adjustment programs. I want to say that for the EU countries that have not yet adopted the euro, the EU had already such rescue mechanisms in place before the crisis. So if a country not yet adopting the euro has difficulties in balance of payments, for example, then it can get loans from the from the EU, which are guaranteed by the EU budget, and Latvia, Hungary, and Romania have used this assistance. But for euro area member states, such a rescue fund did not exist. Now we have it. First there were bilateral loans to Greece, and now we have the permanent European Stability Mechanism, which is a robust fund with a lending capacity of 500 billion euros. It makes the monetary union really more crisis-proof. And this rescue fund is an instrument of solidarity between the member states. Such a proposal, if one would have made such a proposal for such a solidarity mechanism to give loans to a country guaranteed by the other euro area member states, if one would have made the proposal before the crisis, it would have been a date duck from the beginning. And this is now a very good example that shows that with crisis, this is a push for further steps of integration and shows also that the European Union is able to find solutions when there is a new challenge emerging. Now, of course, further efforts are needed to deepen the economic and monetary union. Strengthening the social pillar is one very important issue for the future of the of the EU, and also other proposals. There's a proposal often referred as euro area budget, and I think there is good reasons for a common economic stabilization mechanism for the euro area. I will not elaborate on this, but I want to say that also stronger efforts to push investments in the EU, in the whole EU, not only the euro area, should be taken. More investment is needed to make the European economy fit for the future, to provide the people with the best solutions for climate-compatible energy systems based on renewable energy, for a modern mobility system in urban as well in rural areas with the highest ecological standards, and for preparing, for example, enterprises and private households for the next phase of digitalization. The people expect that the new French President Macron will push these issues on the agenda of the European Council very soon. Interconnecting infrastructure, so more investing in interconnecting infrastructure, what is an issue for the EU, is of course also an issue, a crucial issue for the economic integration of the West Balkan states in order to strengthen their economic potential. This should be an important aspect for the next instrument of pre-accession assistance. I want to mention that the EU is by far the biggest donor to Serbia. Sometimes people do not know it. It is the biggest, by far the biggest donor to Serbia, and I'm sure that the EU will stay committed to support the accession process and the democratic and economic development in the region, also for the next financial period. Now let me share some considerations with you on external challenges the EU is facing. I will focus on three of these challenges: on migration, terrorism, and the new uncertainties for the transatlantic relationship. On migration. You know, so many people are fleeing from war, terror, hunger as never before. More than 65 million people, the UN said this week. Most of those people stay in the region of their home country. Others try to reach European shores. The refugee flow of 2015 made clear that the existing rules on migration, the EU existing rules on migration, on asylum and border control are not sustainable. As a response, the European Union has changed some of its rules and some of its institutions. For example, the new European Border and Coast Guard Agency got more staff, got more means as a former Frontex. For example, the agency may now send staff to third countries, to the Western Balkans, if the third country wishes so. This legislation on border control and border security was decided in a record time for EU decision-making, but for important issues of asylum, this is not yet the case. And in my view, even the new Border and Coast Guard Agency is only a first step. In the long run, I think the task of external border protection and control should become more and more a common task of the European Union, with the legal status of external borders as EU borders and staff from the Union financed by the EU budget. It is, of course, necessary that this border control fully respects human rights and guarantees the free movement of people and goods within the borders inside the EU without border control. In my view, the EU needs more common rules for legal immigration and for a common standard of asylum. The Dublin system, according to which the member states where refugees first enter the European Union is responsible for asylum and assistance. This rule is, of course, not sustainable when most of the refugees come on the Mediterranean route to the EU. So complementary rules for allocating the refugees among the member states are necessary. This redistribution of new allocation then of refugees is, of course, not an easy task, taking into account that there are different traditions in the member states, different own history with escape and displacement, and different sentiments of the population. In September 2015, the Council has decided on a temporary reallocation scheme for 100,000 persons in need from Italy and Greece to other member states, and until now only 20,000 are reallocated, and the Commission has now launched an infringement procedure against Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland because they reject the implementation of this law, and this is a severe conflict. Migration is on the agenda of the European Council tonight. European Council starts tonight in Brussels, and we will see in which way the discussion proceeds. Global terrorism is another threat. Is another challenge which cannot be effectively tackled by a member state alone. Global terrorism does not stop at national borders, just the opposite. Terrorists use the World Wide Web for spreading their propaganda, for recruiting people, for preparing and operating their attacks. And terrorists make also full use of free movement without border controls when they are inside the Schengen area. And therefore, the fight against terrorism needs coordination on the European level, and here effective information sharing is key. Some institutions on the EU level, like Europol, and information exchange systems, like the Schengen information system, there are since years in place. However, not all member states and not all actors in the security field were willing and ready to make use of these tools. Now, since the horrible attacks in Paris, in Nice, in London, in Berlin, to mention only a few, the attitudes of the member states have changed. They will make now use of these tools, but a lot of work has still to be done to strengthen cooperation, to improve, in particular, the interoperability of the information systems and of the interoperability of the security institutions and their structures in the member states. In this field, the European citizens want and they expect more cooperation between the member states and on the EU level, and the EU has to deliver. If one think of all the conflicts in the world, the external challenges to the EU are quite enough. But since the new American President Donald Trump came into office, the question of the future of the transatlantic relationship is added on the agenda of the EU as a further uncertainty. The uncertainty concerns trade policy. The slogan, America First, is interpreted by the new president as a need for protectionism instead of free trade. The uncertainty concerns defense policy. Even if President Trump has not retraced his wording, NATO is obsolete. His personal position on the collective defense clause of NATO, of the NATO treaty, is still a little bit unclear. The uncertainty concerns the agreements and institutions of multilateral global governance. President Trump, as you know, has announced that the US will withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, and we do not know, is this the first step followed by others, withdrawals from multilateral agreements and institutions. And President Trump praised Brexit and predicted that other member states will follow the UK in leaving the Union. The US has, over decades, supported accession to the EU and not withdrawal from the EU, so such statements to welcome Brexit is a full departure from previous US policy towards the European Union, which in the past welcomed and counted on the EU as a stable pillar on the continent and a stable pillar of the Western world of liberal democracies and values. Destabilization of the EU, that's since long the political interest of Russia, as also weakening of NATO and weakening of the transatlantic relationship is in the interest of Russia. Russia, like other global players, as an authoritarian regime, is critical or even rejects the institutions and values of the liberal West. What will be the development in the US? The institutions of liberal democracies in the US are quite strong, and we see already in many aspects that the checks and balances in the US work. And the European Union will do its best to avoid that the transatlantic relationship will be damaged. The EU will keep committed to a strong and positive transatlantic relationship. Nevertheless, we see increasing consent in the European institutions, among the member states and among the European citizens, that the EU should take its fate in its own hand, as, for example, President Juncker or Chancellor Merkel said. And these statements relate also to the future of the common security and defense policy. And according to Eurobarometer, that's a EU-wide opinion poll, as you know, 75% of the people in the European Union are in favor of a common defense and security policy among EU member states. And 2 weeks ago, the European Commission launched a paper on the future of European defense. This paper shall push the political and public debate on this issue and shows 3 scenarios in which way the EU could proceed in the direction of a security and defense union. The first scenario says more cooperation in security and defense between the EU member states, but this would mean voluntary and ad hoc case-by-case decisions for stronger operation. Second scenario says shared responsibility in security and defense. This would mean that cooperation between member states in this issue would become the norm instead of the exception, for example, in defense planning and acquisition of capabilities. And the third scenario is member states would see defense as a really common task with deep integration of defense capabilities. And in all three scenarios, I want to stress this, the European security and defense policy, this is not seen as separate or even separation from NATO, but complementary with NATO. I think, in my personal view, scenario with more cooperation only on ad hoc basis would not be sufficient as an answer on the challenges, so there must be more ambitious steps also to tackle the issue of doubling of defense expenditure and the lack of interoperability of the member states' equipment. But we will see how this important issue will be discussed, not only between the member states' governments, but in particular in the national parliaments. The national parliaments are the decision makers on national defense planning and spending and procurement, and in many member states they are also the national parliaments, the decision makers on military operations, and of course there must be a public debate on this important issue. I will close with some considerations on the question, what do all these developments, decisions, proposals on the future of Europe on which I talked, what do they mean for the candidate countries? Regarding the national elections, the outcome of the last elections, national elections in the EU, is very important for the enlargement process. The anti-European nationalistic parties are opposed to enlargement. They are against new member states. So it's very good news that these parties are losing ground in the elections as we have seen it now. Some considerations regarding Brexit. The UK was always determined to support the European prospects of the West Balkans. Will this support be lost by Brexit? I can, of course, here not speak on behalf of the United Kingdom, but I want to remember that Theresa May stressed repeatedly in speeches and in writing that leaving the EU does not mean that the UK turns its back to Europe. So why should the UK turn its back to the Balkans? The summit of the Berlin process, which supports the cooperation in the region, will take place this year in Trieste. For next year, the summit is foreseen to take place in London, and I think it is in the interest of the West Balkans that this will happen in London. Maybe the Berlin process is a good forum to keep the UK engaged in supporting the European prospects of the Western Balkans. What do the considerations regarding responses the EU has delivered on the different challenges and crises mean for the accession for the candidate countries? Of course, new legislation, new institutions means that the acquis communautaire is changed, is broadened. The acquis communautaire, which has to be adopted by candidate countries before accession. But as I elaborated a little bit for the issue of strengthened economic governance in the EU, the demand to modernize the administration, make it more efficient and more transparent, that brings already during the negotiation process and accession benefits to the people. And this is only one example of others. Regulations, for example, for the financial market or banking sector are other examples. What about the discussion and the proposals on the future of the European integration process? I touched this discussion. Should the European Union in the future be less ambitious? Should it concentrate only on the single market? Should it always wait for further integration steps for the most hesitating member state, or should there be more flexibility in the sense that member states which already want to have more common policy, further integration steps, for example, in taxation, that they can go ahead. The European Treaty provides already the possibility of what is called enhanced cooperation, and some of the new member states and also candidate countries have fears that it would mean they are left behind. But no, I have to say very clearly, this flexibility concept is not the concept of two-speed Europe. No, it's a concept of what I would call a concept of multi-avant-garde. So, would a candidate country be excluded? No, it's in the hands of a candidate country whether it wants to join such an avant-garde group right from the accession day. And finally, are the West Balkans now pushed out of the EU agenda by all those discussions and decisions on the future of the EU and by the major challenges such as migration and counter-terrorism? No, precisely these challenges make it very clear that the EU membership of the Western Balkan states is of mutual interest, in the interest of the Western Balkan states and the European Union. But it is not only about this functional argument, it's also about values, and for me, as an EU fan, I'm convinced that belonging to the family of the EU, belonging to this family with its great values, is for the benefit of the people. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
This is on, okay. Thank you very much, Professor Schreyer, for this very thorough and in-depth analysis of not only the present state of the EU, but also, I would say, of many major challenges that the EU and Europe as a whole has been facing recently and will continue to face, at least in the recent future. And many of the questions were raised that concern also our region and our country. And I'm sure that you must have some questions or comments. Yeah, these two. Evo imate mikrofon je ovdje.
Please, what is your opinion about this new political organization please, what is your opinion about this new political organization in the European Union, DiEM25? They criticize Brussels bureaucracy and centralization, but from the left side, from the left political side. What is your opinion for this proposition on the program for one new rebuild European Union?
Yeah, from the left side, when I look to the European Parliament, of course, also there are quite different left-wing parties in the group. I often hear this argument, we are pro the European Union, but for another European Union. And then having a catalogue of criteria, what they want to have changed. But of course, the European Union is now a member union of 27 member states, and you have to find agreements. Not only one direction, it goes not only into one direction. Of the question of overwhelming bureaucracy, here we have the point that, of course, all rules must fit the different cultures, administrative experience, and so on, in so many different member states. And sometimes also the result that 28 member states in the Council must agree on it, that in the European Parliament quite different ideas must find a consensus, then sometimes it gets very complicated. But most of the EU legislations are a directive which has to be translated into national policies. And so it's done sometimes in the hand to make, of the member states to make it easier. Maybe you concerned the funds, or can it be that your question has gone to bureaucracy for using EU funds?
Da li se vaše pitanje odnosi pre svega na način na koji se pojedine birokratizacije i kako se birokratski priprema fondovi?
Da, fondovima i nedostatak lokalnog odlučivanja, to je poenta dijema.
The lack of local involvement, local participation in decision making as one of the main arguments.
Lack of direct participation in the democracy.
Yeah. Of course, it is a multi-level system, the European Union. We have the local, the regional levels in the member states, we have the national level, and we have the EU level. And the decision-making on the EU, there is twofold. Democratic legitimacy, because the European Parliament is involved as a representative, the direct elected representatives of the people, and we have the European Council, the representation of the governments, which are responsible and accountable to their national parliaments. We see, of course, a huge difference in which way the national parliaments control their national governments. And a good democracy in the European Union depends, of course, also on this issue that there is a strong national parliament and a lively democracy in the European Union. I can only say from this side of economic issues, for example, when member states have to deliver a national reform program, saying in which way they want to modernize their energy system towards renewable energies, or defend youth unemployment. When the member states have to deliver such programs, it is, of course, not enough when this is seen as a task of the administration and the government presenting a paper in Brussels. But it has to be discussed in the national parliaments, and for setting up such a program, it is written in the legislation they should take the other stakeholders also into the discussion. So it's very important, in my view, that civil society then can participate. But this cannot be ordered by the European level. This is the responsibility of a member state to organize it in such a way that it is a democratic process. So I really hope that, other way around, we have seen with the accession of the countries of Central Europe, the new member states, that by the accession process, the parliament were strengthened because they got very important roles, and they kept this role, and they often make a stronger control of their governments, what they are deciding in the council, than it was in the old member states.
Are there any more questions? Two questions.
thank you for your
Thank you for your lecture, and thank you for your readiness to answer some questions from the audience. I would like to ask three questions, in fact, three short questions. The first one is, what do you think about the future of EU, like utopian vision of United States of Europe? Is it possible to go this direction of stronger integration, of reaching the level of state, not only of union? This is the first question. The second question is, do you know something, to tell us something about opinions of students or young generation of Germans about European Union? Are they more skeptic than their parents, or maybe quite opposite, more enthusiastic, or more ready to accept new countries as member states, whatever? And the third question, maybe not directly connected with your lecture, but I will use opportunity that you are professor of university. There are a lot of discussion led here about future of social sciences. So sometimes the arguments from certain points of view are used that in European Union social sciences are in decline, that funds are more rare, that simply it is the domain of the domain which is diminishing. So is it really true, or maybe what is your opinion? What is the situation and the future of social sciences in European Union? If you don't know, this is out of your maybe scope of lecture, but simply maybe it is interesting for some of us. Thank you in advance.
Yeah, thank you for your question. On the last question, I have no knowledge on the situation here in the country, whether social sciences are under pressure or whether the students do not obtain for this faculty. In Germany, I cannot say that social sciences are under pressure. No, no, really not. The young generation, is it more skeptic on the European Union? No, this is not the case. We have what we call the generation Erasmus, so very European-minded, very open with their own experiences of living in Europe. What was really interesting was in the UK. Here the participation of the younger in the Brexit vote was under average. And then there was the result, and then the young people made a demonstration pro-Europe, but of course it was too late. And here, when we see a pressure on the UK government to do everything for a good relation with the European Union, and for example also in the sense of free movement of persons, then it comes in particular from the younger generation. On this question of when will there be, no, you didn't ask it in this way, but when will there be a United States of Europe? I cannot answer it. I think that in the moment, the European Union has its 60th anniversary celebrated. It sounds old, but when we look to the history, It's a relatively young political entity. And I think for a while it will be a union of the people and the union of member states. But on the other hand, we see that more and more integration takes place. What is the difference between this structure of the European Union as we have it and the United States of Europe? The difference to a federal system is that in a federal system, the federal level can decide what is the federal task. While in the European Union, we have a kind of bottom-up approach. The member states confer competences on the European level, what the European Union should do. And I think this structure will be also there for a while in the future, but with more and more task and sovereignty shared with the European Union level.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my question is, do you think that maybe one another internal challenge for the EU would be this balance of power between member states? Because, for example, the most obvious example is maybe the disbalance between wealthier northern states and economically dependent southern states. This is, for example, something that Wolfgang Streeck mentions as one of the major points of friction, internal conflicts within the EU. This balance of power, this is the reason why southern states feel that they are somehow compelled to adopt certain policies that are more in line with the economic situation and the economic context of the northern states. So this is my question. Do you think that this is a problem? And also, do you think, because you have direct experience, you work in the European Commission, so my question is, do you think that this balance is maybe also reflected in the European institutions, Parliament and Commission, or not?
The whole construction of the European Union is based on equality of the citizens and equal rights for the member states. So each member state counts the same value, let me say it in this way. And in a lot of issues, we need unanimity. Whether it is a small, a big country, we have different sizes, of course, in the European Union, quite different. You know that Malta has about 400,000 people, and Luxembourg has about 400,000 people, and Germany has more than 82 million. But when it comes to the question of unanimity, also the Maltese Prime Minister must agree on something which is on the table. In the European institutions, in the European Parliament, as you know, here the citizens are represented according to the principle of decreasing proportionality, so ensuring that also the Maltese people have 6 deputies in the parliament, and no nationality has the majority there, and this is of course important. So it's always necessary that there are compromises, that groups go together. And in the European Commission, each member state can nominate a member of the European Commission. So also here you see that it is a very important issue. In economic terms, of course, a big economy has more influence on the total performance of the European economy as a small country has it. And by this, then also this country has a very great responsibility. But the idea that Mrs. Merkel could alone say what the direction of the European Union would be, no, this would not flow. This would not flow. So it's always necessary that also the head of government or head of state of a big country finds the lies. And this is the principle, the way the European Union works. Yeah. For the European integration process, the French-German partnership is very important, and this is not because those countries have ex ante a common approach. No, it's more because these two countries have often quite different approaches, and when they agree, they can then also make a compromise where a lot of other countries find themselves and can say we can go along this way.
And then something like.
Thank you for your talk. You mentioned a couple of problems, but I can see that you're very optimistic about the prospects of the European Union. And before you started your talk, we were told not to think about the problems, but to try to think how we can be a part of a solution as well. So I'm not able to think like that for a million reasons, but I wonder if you see Serbia as a part of any solution. And if it is, to what problem then could Serbia offer a solution to? So that would be my question. Thank you.
You asked whether Serbia would be a solution or a problem on a specific issue or in general?
There are a lot of problems, but if you can actually address maybe one of the problems that you're concerned with, and how can Serbia offer something as a part of a solution? I mean, we don't have time to talk about all problems, so at least one. Thanks.
Okay, I will give just a few comments. I don't ask for reply on everything. Unlike my colleague, I have very easy solutions, like put on a makeup, you know, how to be part of the solution. My idea would be, you know, put on some makeup, and I will now try to tell you why I'm saying this. We are in a country where 50% of the people, roughly, I don't follow the data, but roughly, traditionally, 50% of the people are against the EU. And while I was listening to you, thank you for your lecture, it was comprehensive. It reminds on what needs to be reminded over and over, that EU is the place where rule of law, where social welfare rests, where disparity between poor and rich are, you know, comparatively low compared to other countries. You presented hard facts that cannot be disputed. And it makes me think, why is it that 50% of the people still here and throughout the Western Balkans are still so Eurosceptic, and not only here. So these are like, I'm like impersonating these 50%. So I will give you like a few sentences, and that's it. I don't ask for an immediate answer. So if all this is true, rule of law and everything, and UKIP was lying, why did people vote for them? That would be one idea that you know, a genuine idea. And the other one would be, listening to your lecture, I would say that the strongest stylistic figure that you used was personification. EU does this, EU thinks this, EU applies this. That personification gives the idea, the appearance of EU as firm, coherent, as a kind of strong entity. And yet, why is it then that so many people think of EU as deluded, disorganized, disjoint, dysfunctional, and you name it, bureaucratized? And the last thing would be, again, for these 50%, if these values and liberalism is good, why are we so poor? So this is, I'm not asking for ready-made answers. I'm just saying, like, perhaps putting on makeup would make some sense. And my last example, I'm sorry for taking long. A couple years ago, we had terrible floodings here in Serbia and in Bosnia. After the floodings, EU donated hundreds of millions of euros to repair those houses. And when you go to Serbia, you see those small, like signs, small signs, EU funded this, EU helped this. They're very small, like, not billboards, just signs somewhere. And on the second day of the flooding, Russian Ministry for Special Affairs, they sent a plane with their special forces and with few motorboats, and they use these boats to save people, and they get, 5 points, and EU gets 0 points, So that's, I'm sorry, I was trying to represent, the other half, and let me remind you, this other half is probably what elects our government for years and years. Strong pro-Europeans are mostly in the opposition in the last 4 years or so. Okay, enough.
Okay, thanks. And this final question. Well, it's more of a comment, actually. Maybe I just want to end up on what has been said regarding this nationalistic recourses to the European Union in Serbia, etc. Well, there's this thing called ideology, basically, whereby, of course, the anti-EU sentiment is being utilized to mobilize local nationalist movements or whatever. But I think that most of what has been said is hinting at maybe what has been missing in the talk. And I think that's a key word, and that's austerity, which joins these movements, right-wing movements. But only to just maybe reply on this, I think that when we go down a bit on an institutional level, there's of course this tensions between different institutions such as the European Central Bank, the IMF, the Commission, and the Parliament, and several local, of course, governments. I mean, in the case of Greece, there was also the ECB freezing the savings accounts of Greece, and there's this question of whether this is an issue of sovereignty of the ECB and the ESM, etc. I'm just giving an example, but I think that within an institutional level there exists certain forms of tensions between European institutions. And if you recall, there was this IMF a paper calling out neoliberalism, calling out austerity as dysfunctional. So the IMF even, at least one section of the IMF even claimed that it has been wrong in doing these sort of policies, etc. So maybe I would say that this is also an institutional thing. So not only a thing of the visions of the European values or the like, but also an institutional thing. And I think that the right-wing movements are in fact right to address that, but on a wrong way, of course. in the sense that they're using ideology, nationalistic ideology, to criticize the European Union, and in this sense we need more debate on this, because in Serbia it's not present at all. Social dialogue on the European Union, it's not present at all. You only get right-wing Euroscepticism. So maybe your thoughts on this would be very welcome, in the sense of what would be a healthy Euroscepticism, and what do you see in the sense, what is the problem that you see with Euro accessions outside of what you mentioned? And now, coming to what we talked about earlier, you also mentioned this social pillar, the strengthening of the social pillar. I think this is the key to our discussion here. So maybe if you could just elaborate on that, because it's something that we hear more and more in terms of a new program for the Western Balkans within this Berlin process, etc. And I think maybe a clarification would be very welcome in this sense. And now coming back to a few just technical questions, you mentioned also this European prosecutor. So what is that? What form would it take? How would it function? And for the last part, and I really promise this would be my final comment, yesterday you mentioned that you are against multi-speed Europe, as Angela Merkel accepted it, Jean-Claude Juncker in his 5-point plan, but you are for flexibility, like more flexible relations between different member states, and I think that's also an alternative thinking to Juncker's proposal, but maybe you could also elaborate on this, because it really presents a sort of a different approach as to what has been usually said on the topic. Thank you.
And please, one very short question. I'm not so sure should be the last one or not, but let me ask you something. It's okay. If it doesn't work, I can figure it out. No, I'm going to be very short. I would like to know what is your opinion about the educational system. Why actually should we follow some educational system which, according to opinion, which is very well here, is not the process of liberalization. Actually, before the faculty, our actually academic knowledge enjoyed a little bit more of freedom, and I cannot speak more. I have been attending faculty of philosophy and post-scholarship of the University of Leuven, Belgium. You know, now according to this following of Bologna's conventions, I cannot see the procedure of liberalization. I'm going to be very short. Before, the education was much more serious than today. I'm so sorry, I just would like to know what's your opinion. That's all, thank you.
Of course, on this question on the education system, it will be difficult for me to answer this because I cannot say in which way the education system of Serbia has changed or not changed. Maybe we have some experts here on education that can take up this question. But of course, the European Union with its liberal values, it depends that these liberal values are also an element of the education system, that it is based on this. And to have good democrats, it needs to educate young people in this way. So I do not know whether you mentioned this, but of course here it is very important, and also the European Union is also built up on the idea of reconciliation between countries. And also this is a question of the education system and the school books, for example. So very important. On the European prosecutor, Who put the question? Yeah, it's here. On the European prosecutor, it goes on prosecuting fraud against the interest of the European Union. This means on the expenditure side of fraud against with the funds from the European budget, and on the other side also combating fraud on the revenue side, for example, in the area of value-added tax. And it would mean that on the European level, there will be established such an office with prosecutors from the different member states, so to ensure that when there is fraud which crosses borders, so which concerns several member states, that it is prosecuted, because there was often the experience that in the member states the judicial system says, oh, it goes only on EU funds, so we will not have the priority in prosecuting fraud in this area. The social pillar, the Commission has launched now this paper, making very clear, strengthening the social pillar of the European policies is not only a matter of the EU level, because the EU level has not so much legal competences on this area, but it concerns also the member states. For example, when it goes to minimum wages, for example, here legislation on the member states level is necessary. It's not a subject for EU level, but the member states could agree that such a minimum wage should have a specific proportion of the average, for example. They cannot say it should be the same in every country. This would make no sense, but they can set common standards, and this is the way the proposal is done. On austerity and the tensions between the institutions on economic policy, of course there are discussions what is the best way. And sometimes, as we have it with the ECB policy, when there is a low interest policy, then Germany criticizes it because it is in quite another economic position than, for example, Italy. Here it is necessary to have this low interest rate to push investment. So there must always be a policy which which gives the best for the whole community, and there is applause and there is criticism, but it is not a point that it would create instability in the European Union. So I think it is often the case when there is a conflict in the European Union, a conflict between the institutions or between member states, then it is said a crisis in the European Union. On a member states level, one would say, there are different opinions and there are conflicts. So sometimes we have to look with another view on the European level and not always say instability and so on. On austerity, I'm totally convinced that it is the right way for member states that they bring their public finances in order and not to push the burden on future generation. Expenditure should be financed by the taxes from the current generation and not saying we avoid taxation for this generation by taking up more loans and credits. Then there was the question, why was UKIP so successful, or also other anti-European parties? As I mentioned, UKIP made a campaign, and we had a special situation, of course, in the UK. But in the UK, we see also this important point. The government always said when something was not so popular in its own population, this is Brussels. Brussels orders us to do this and this. So this Brussels bashing is very popular sometimes. And now Cameron harvests the negative impact of his Brussels bashing. This was one of the reasons, but I think in other countries now it's really the case that the Brexit was a wake-up call for reconsidering what is the value of being a member state of the European Union. So for the next election, really, I'm very optimistic. On this question, what would Serbia bring in? So should the European Union first sit together and make a catalogue of criteria, and does Serbia fulfill this or fulfill this? Looking to the history of the Balkans, of the recent history, I think it would be very important that the region is stabilized. And the European Union's history is that working together, first maybe only in the economic field, and then making the next political integration step. This is the best way for guaranteeing peace in a region and between member states. And having peace, this is a condition for prosperity and to have a positive look on the future. And I think for this reason, it is really worth for the European Union to give the best support for the region, that it goes a democratic way, is a stable region, and will then finally, when it wants, come to the European family.